So former President Trump expected to attend a UFC event tonight in Newark, New Jersey, days after his New York City conviction. Joining us with more on the Trump verdict aftermath and President Biden's reaction, Kansas Senator Roger Marshall, member of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. So you just heard the president say that the former president had every opportunity to defend himself in court and that the justice system worked. What do you say to that, Senator?
Wow, what we saw was a rigged judge, a rigged DA. The whole timing of this trial was rigged as well. No, I don't think that this is what it's supposed to look like. I think everybody across the world is looking at this mockery and saying the president of the United States took the blindfold off of Lady Justice and then he threw her underneath a speeding bus. No, he did not have an opportunity to defend himself. Not when a judge, like he had in this particular trial, put their total weight on the scale.
Well, you are one of the signers of a Senate letter that suggests you don't want to cooperate with the Biden administration on anything that doesn't involve the safety and security of the American people as a result of this conviction. There it is. You're one of the 8 U.S. senators who have signed it. What's the purpose here?
Right. So we've seen Joe Biden make a mockery of our legal system, and we are going to fight fire with fire. We are going to grind the Senate to a halt as best we are going to fight against every one of his political nominations, every one of his judges that he's nominating, any type of his agenda we're going to slow it down as best possible. There's something called unanimous consent, and that's how about 90% of the legislation gets through the Senate. We're going to do everything we can to throw the brakes on this. Look, what Joe Biden did was election interference by attacking his chief political rival, keeping him from out there campaigning. Just the timing of all this is atrocious, so we're going to fight fire with fire. I want to give Senator Mike Lee from the great state of Utah a lot of credit for leading this letter as well, so we look forward to fighting fire with fire.
But as you well know, these charges were not federal charges. They weren't brought by Joe Biden. They were brought by Alvin Bragg, the district attorney in New York City.
Yeah, no doubt about that. But, show me what was the real crime that they were trying to put together their false charges. He never did accomplish that. But the timing of this was certainly orchestrated behind the scenes by Joe Biden. He orchestrated all these different attacks on Donald Trump through the legal system, all 3 different trials.
All right. So the president, according to Joe Biden, had every opportunity to defend himself. But a lot of observers suggest that the judge, in the way he wrote the jury instructions, left an awful lot of room for a conviction.
Right. So first of all, I don't know if another judge in America would even try this case. I mean, it was so atrocious. Even Alvin Bragg at the beginning of after he was elected, even though he ran on going after Trump, after he was elected, said, look, there's nothing there. I don't want this case. But suddenly Donald Trump is now leading the polls. He's going to be the Republican nominee. And Alvin Bragg says, let's take it on. He found a judge, a person that had contributed finances to Joe Biden's campaign. They found that judge to take this case on. And yes, he took his whole body weight and put it on top of the scales. And again, he took the blinds off of Lady Justice and threw her under a speeding bus.
But let's go back to that letter that you signed along with 7 other Republican senators. The American people want folks in Washington to do the business of the American people. Are you afraid of running afoul of the American voter by, vowing to sort of grind things to a halt in the Senate in response to the Trump conviction?
Probably the best thing that could happen for America is for Congress to get nothing more accomplished. More likely than not, anything they accomplish between now and November is going to be no good. Look, we've already spent more money than we should have. We're already $34 trillion in debt. The judicial nominees we're getting in front of are very much political hack jobs as well. I think the very best thing we could do for America is to stop the spending, stop the new regulations that they want to throw out there, and stop the Biden agenda. We've seen enough of this. November can't get here soon enough. America is ready for this election. And really, John, think about it. Every election is about the future. And I can't wait to see these two candidates present their vision. And as they present their vision, they're going to have to go back and say, and here's my policies, with the biggest concerns of Americans being an open southern border and inflation. What is Joe Biden going to run on? As opposed to President Trump can say, look, I secured the border. We didn't have inflation. We had the greatest economy of my professional lifetime. I was rolling back regulations. So President Trump has everything to run on. I think that yesterday or Thursday's verdict was just a blip on the radar screen, and Americans are ready to move forward.
Very quickly, Joe Manchin left the Democratic Party as a senator after the Trump verdict, says he is an independent now, but he will still caucus with the Democrats. Does that change anything in the U.S. Senate?
Well, I think that, again, on these 50-50 nominations as they go forward, I think he's got a foot now more in the moderate water as well. So I think he's going to be more inclined to say, wait a second, these judicial nominees that Biden has given us that are not qualified, politically minded as well, that some of those won't make it across the finish line. And I just have to point out, think about who the Democrat Party is today. It is not the Democrat Party of John F. Kennedy. It's certainly not the Democrat Party of Joe Manchin anymore either. Kirsten Sinema left them as well. Look, people are leaving the Democrat Party. Joe Biden, he's not alone either. Joe Manchin is not alone. So I think that we're seeing this wave throughout the nation.
Kansas Senator Roger Marshall, Republican. Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.